Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, where religion, culture, and politics intersect in real time. I'm one of your hosts for this episode, Jamar Tisby, and I am joined, as always, by Diana Butler Bass,
Hey, it's good to be with you, Jamar.
Kristen Dumay,
Hey, Jamar.
and Robby Jones.
Hi there, Jamar.
We are scholars, three historians and a sociologist who explore how religion shapes America's past and present. But there's a twist. One of us picks a topic, and the rest of us really don't know what's coming. No prep, no scripts, just raw, unfiltered conversation. That's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted. And this episode is officially in session. Greetings, folks. Good to see y'all.
Can we just breathe for a moment? Being in each other's presence.
Yeah, it is good to be here.
Gosh. Yeah, it's
It
good
really
to be.
is a balm each week. We do these lives once a month if you're new here, but we record pretty much weekly. And honestly, it's for me, it's like a sprint just to get to our weekly recording sessions to be able to talk and decompress. And we're so excited to open it up to our listeners as well. So, how are folks feeling this week?
I had one really good day was when I realized that there were actually other people out there who wanted to protest all of this. And so a friend of mine went up to the Treasury rally and she started sending me texts and pictures. And I went, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I went to bed that night feeling better. Any single night than I had since January 20th. I felt less alone and less crazy. So that really lifted me. And I'm also focusing really hard on trying to figure out what my lane is. I think it's really important to figure out our own lanes, supporting everybody else in their lanes and knowing as much as we can about what the total is, but not becoming overwhelmed by the things that we really truly have no control over.
Mm.
Instead, if we take some leadership in our own spheres, it's going to help, I think, all of this move ahead. So those are the two things I'm feeling: somewhat overwhelmed and conflicted, trying to sort of get that manageable in a psychologically and spiritually appropriate way, and somewhat encouraged. And encouraged that there are 900 people here tonight.
Yeah, we had 900 folks register for tonight. So far, about 500 of you have hopped on. Thank you so much for letting us know where you're tuning in from. And y'all, this is just a beginning of a conversation. So please do subscribe at convocation.substack.com. That's where you get all the announcements about when we'll do the next live recording and when the next podcast comes out on a weekly basis. And we're taking a special look during this first 100 days of this new, I call it a regime. I think administration is too much of a normalizing of what's happening here. So, yeah, Kristen, have you done any traveling this week or since our last conversation?
I have not, except back and forth between Grand Rapids and Notre Dame. So I'm back at Notre Dame today, and I'm trying to keep my head down and really crank out the next book, and that's been going well, while also, trying to track all the things. And in terms of how I'm feeling, not great. It's fair to say. And also, I feel like I don't have a clear grasp of timing, right? What trajectory are we on? Now, obviously, everything has come fast and furious in the first couple of weeks, but more than that, I feel like we're waiting, right? We're waiting for a catalyzing moment. And I'm not sure what that's going to be or when that's going to be. I pray it is going to be at some point and we don't kind of miss this, but I just feel like this limbo of we're doing the work, we're educating ourselves, we're keeping the focus, we're making the phone calls to representatives, and we're tracking, but I feel like we're waiting for a moment. So that's how I describe myself: anxiously and deliberately waiting.
So Jamar, I'll jump in, but I'm gonna pitch it to you, and I'll wrap it up on the back end. Yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I was gonna get my piece in for sure. I always say something. This was a super interesting week. One, I had the flu, which was
Uh,
knocked me out for a week. I feel like the older I get, the longer these illnesses affect me. So that was a very good reminder of my humanity. But then just right before I had fully recovered, I had my first speaking engagement since the inauguration, and that was a trip. So I went out to a church in Palo Alto near San Francisco. I've been there several times and lovely, lovely congregation, no friction there. But I did feel some type of way. Kristen, you've mentioned this before. It's just like you feel some type of way because so much of what you're doing is trying to give people the bad news
Yeah.
and making sure they understand how bad it is. I was really taking pains to help Christian folks know this is not business as usual. And what we're facing, this onslaught, this deluge of bad stuff, is actually far worse than most everyday people probably realize. And at the same time, there were two very, sort of uplifting moments. One, I was talking about my children's books, The Spirit of Justice and Stories of the Spirit of Justice. Those are for um, tweens. This book here, that's for kids 8 to 12. And then my very first picture book, I Am the Spirit of Justice, is for kids 4 to 7. They had a racial justice book fair for kids.
Oh, wow.
So I got to, before the church service, talk about each of the books to a room full of wiggly kids and the adults who brought them. And that was so fun. I got to dig back into my sixth grade teacher bag. And then I preached, my first time preaching since the inauguration. I preached on Psalm 77, and the theme was Remember the Deeds of the Lord. So as we go through this, remembering the faithfulness of God in the past to give us strength to continue in the future. So yeah, that's what's been going on and a lot more coming. But thanks for asking, Robby. What's going on in your world?
yeah, well, a couple of things, kind of both professional and personal. So, on the personal front, I actually saw it go by in the chat, someone saying former USAID worker. And so, I live here in DC and know, I mean, I know more than a dozen people who are losing their jobs, like actively losing their jobs. And like you said, Christian, just waiting, to know, is it tomorrow? Is it Monday? Do I get paid furlough? Do I not get paid? Can I use my paid leave? What happens when that runs out? What about my health insurance? Am I going to be able to make my house payment? I mean, so I had dinner with a very close friend last night, and I think the other thing to forget is that there's a whole ecosystem around places like USAID. So it's not just the organization itself, but there are all these NGOs that get USAID funding who then go and deliver services. So, dinner with a friend who is on a USAID grant that provides health services to, low-income people in Africa. And they're shuttered, right? And is in year three of a 3-year, $80 million USAID grant that is now just frozen. So there are materials on ships and materials in warehouses that are just going to probably go to waste, right? And people who are going to go without health care. Doctors in Africa, they're going to lose their jobs, right? Clinics that are going to shutter, all of that. And a 15-person team here in the US that's suddenly without a job as well. So I think for all of that, I'm sure we have folks on here who are affected by all of that. And so let me just say, like, our hearts are out to you, right? You were in it
Yes.
to fight the good fight and to do good in the world, and here this regime, I think it's the right word, right? This regime has just come in and bulldozed, right? A whole ecosystem here. I said to my friend last night, it feels like, it's in DC, at least the feeling to me is that, you were here, you went to bed, and, you wake up in the morning and you were living in this kind of rainforest ecosystem and somebody has just clear cut the whole thing. So there is this whole system of things that work together that are just gone all of a sudden. So I think that's kind of one thing. And then the other thing I'll talk about in a minute, but we at PRRI did release our next installment of the longest and largest ongoing study of white Christian nationalism in the country that just came out on Tuesday. So that's been my last couple of days, just kind of dealing with that. So both of those things.
And that report is absolutely essential reading, Robby. So I really appreciate, we let a sociologist come on this podcast.
That's so nice. I'm so happy about
other
that.
historians. And it's
I always feel
like
we're one of those set problems from second grade. Which one doesn't belong?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Which one is different? But we believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion on this podcast.
That's right.
And so we've done it with this sociologist. No, but you really do shine so much light on the sociological and statistical aspects of what we're going through. So that report just came out. Let us know what's in it.
Well, I won't take up too much time to down the details, but I will hit some of the highlights that I think were really actually hopeful. Now that's going to sound a little bit strange, but when you sit with a piece of data. Study. This is an ongoing study that's been going on since 2022, right? And so to date, we have interviewed more than 60,000 Americans in getting their attitudes around Christian nationalism. So this last installment was more than 22,000 Americans that we interviewed just last year in 2023. And so, I think the big place to start is, it is on the one hand, 3 in 10 Americans that share this view. So it's 1 in 10 that qualify as full-on Christian nationalism adherents. And those are people who completely agree with every question that we ask about this. And the questions on the PRI study are not softball questions. They are things like the U.S. should base its laws on the Bible. The U.S. should declare itself a Christian nation. Christians should exercise dominion over all areas of the government and society. So these are not softy questions. These are pretty hard questions. We have about 1 in 10 Americans who completely agree with all. We have 5 different questions like that, and then another 20% of people who are sympathetic, who lean. So putting it together, it's about 3 in 10 Americans. And that's remained fairly steady over the time we've been measuring. But this time and in this moment, what really jumped out at me was when you look at that little pie chart, there's like that little 30% wedge, but that means that there is a 70% wedge, right, sitting around the other side that looks like like the mouth of a Pac-Man, or the body of the Pac-Man, that is much bigger than that, right? So, it's nearly 4 in 10 Americans who are skeptics and 3 in 10 who are rejectors of this worldview. So there are more of us than there are of them, right? There are more people supporting a pluralistic, religiously, racially pluralistic democracy than those who want a Christian theocracy in this country. And I think it doesn't feel like that right now, right? Because I think they are wielding power, and it's through that it is absolutely the animating force of the MAGA movement. It is now taken over the Republican Party. A majority of Republicans are now Christian nationalism adherents or sympathizers. So that's kind of part of what's happened and how it gets amplified to be much bigger and given power that is way disproportionate to its numbers. But I think I'll just with that one. Oh, and then with one other point. So that's the partisan point. If you look at religious groups in the country, there are only 2 among whom a majority say qualify as Christian nationalism sympathizers or adherents. Those are white evangelical Protestants, the group that I grew up in. They are 2/3 as white Christian nationalism supporters, and they are Latino Protestants. The other group, both of those groups voted majority for Trump in the last election cycle. But that means that no other religious groups, including other Christian groups, are majority Christian nationalists in their orientation. And that's really important, I think, to remember as well, especially when it looks like, the Project 2025 playbook, which is shot through with Christian nationalism, is running rampant, roughshod over the whole country right now.
Did either of you, Diana or Kristen, get a chance to look into the report and like what stuck out to you? And appreciate that summary, Robby.
Oh, can I just say real quick before I forget that? So if you want the overview and kind of my take on the overview, it is up on my Substack, White Too Long, now. And I did a short kind of 20-minute explainer with Jen Rubin from The Contrarian. Some of you may be subscribers to The Contrarians, and that's on my post, and it's up on The Contrarian as well.
My response was really where Robby ended here. The point that let's remind ourselves, we're talking 30% of Americans. That said, the majority of the Republican Party and the Republican Party has wholly capitulated to this vision. And so we're up against a lot. But I think, we're already mentioning just how important it is. And I see this in the comments all the time to know we are not alone. We're not alone. And there are a whole lot of us. Right. And that's really important because I'm sure we'll talk about the muzzle velocity of Steve Bannon, that Ezra Klein had that video on describing, it's meant to overwhelm us. All of the executive orders, all of what's going on, it's meant to be overwhelming. And we're seeing how they are dismantling our system of checks and balances. And it just feels stunning. And like you said, Jamar, it's bad. And the four of us have a pretty clear sense for how bad, and it's worse than most people know, worse than almost anybody knows. On the other hand, right, there are a lot of us who are not okay with that. And so, just be strong. And again, I'm waiting for that moment when we can come together in our strength and say, no, we draw the line.
100%. And Diana, you watched his, Robby was on with Jennifer Rubin. That was very fancy. And how did that strike you?
Actually, I said this to Robby earlier today when we were talking on the phone. I thought it was one of the best things I've ever heard him do. It is just so clear, so crisp, so to the point. I really urge people to go over there, watch that video, and share it widely. So that was my first take. I was thinking about how this connects with a couple other concerns that I believe that all four of us have had over the longer term. And that is, here's 30% of Americans who are sympathizers and or adherents, 70% who are not, and only these two religious groups, white evangelicals and Hispanic Protestants, have a majority of Christian nationalists who also identify with that religion. And so that means a couple really interesting things. It means, one, even among groups like white Catholics and white non-evangelical Protestants who voted for Trump, they nevertheless did not vote for Trump because he was a Christian nationalist. They voted for the Republicans for different reasons. And I think that that little slice of people has always been a kind of a wedge vote, that if anyone paid attention to them, they could be peeled away from extreme Christian nationalism and perhaps redirected towards other candidates. Now, that I don't know how to do that. I'm not a political operative or any of those things, but I do think that means there are a tremendous number of white non-evangelical Protestants, white mainliners, and white Catholics who are looking at this probably in horror. And although they themselves are Republicans, now they probably don't know what to do. So so I think that is a really interesting little set of statistics to hold on to. And the other thing that really concerns me, that one gives me a little bit of hope that there are churches and communities where there still might be talking space and still might be space to form coalitions with unlikely people in order to defeat all of it. So that's my hopeful place. My less hopeful place, or my worried place, is the fact that Christianity as a whole, for white people, has now been associated with that 30% of Americans. So if you say you're a Christian, you happen to be white, people are going to assume that you're a Christian nationalist. And there's a really interesting thing that happened just today in my social media. I've been calling around DC. Just this is very anecdotal research. This is the kind of thing historians do and not sociologists, Robby. Um, but I've been asking friends of mine who are pastors how many people in their congregations are being directly impacted in Fairfax County, Montgomery County, PG County, and DC in their congregations. And so every pastor that I've asked so far has said that somewhere between 12 and maybe 20 or 24, so somewhere between a dozen and 2 dozen, 10 to 20, somewhere in that range, individuals and or families in their congregations have lost their jobs or are imminent danger of losing their jobs. And that is a pastoral emergency, frankly. It's beginning to have huge ripple effects throughout the DC area in local congregations. And many of those congregations are already congregations that were sort of just hanging on. Little mainline churches sort of in decline, churches that were trying to do good, but have limited resources, churches that were fighting the good fight already. And now, what happens if 12 families in your congregation no longer have their income? There goes the budget of a small church. You're going to start laying off employees. You're going to be cutting back on whatever good services you're doing. You might have to get rid of your food pantry in order to be able to just keep the heat on in your building and take care of maybe the few people who are in such crisis in your church. So I mentioned that on Blue Sky. And guess what happened? Wasn't a whole lot of sympathy. I actually got responses like, oh, well, they deserve it. And I'm going, I can't even believe this. One, the person assumed that all of the Christians who are being impacted by this were white Christians who voted for Trump. And two, they assumed that all Christians, white Christians, voted for Trump. And so literally, I had people yelling at me saying, I hope they hurt. And there was absolutely zippo compassion for the idea that families with children were being upended, their lives being upended like this. And so that to me shows this really terrible truth about Robby's statistics, is that people have heard this thing about white Christian nationalism, and now they're just assuming that that's what all of Christianity is. And frankly, they have had enough. And that to me seems morally, culturally, and civically dangerous.
Well, on that, a kind of a related topic, Diana, I see that a number of people in the comments are mentioning Trump's appearance at the National Prayer Breakfast today. And
yep.
His announcement of asking Pam Bondi to head up, our Attorney General to head up this new anti-Christian bias task force to, make sure that there's no anti-Christian bias throughout the federal government. And, I'm guessing it probably won't stop there. This has been something I've been tracking for nearly a year now. He was all about this at his National Religious Broadcasters Convention last winter already, promising conservative white Christians that, he was going to protect them. He was going to defend them and, of course, go after those who they felt were persecuting them, or going after those who infringed in some way upon their rights or privileges, right? And so here we are, we get to see what this is going to entail. But I have to say, I don't think it's going to entail many good things, but this gets to your point, Diana, because I put up on Blue Sky today that, I'm predicting that it's Christians themselves who are going to be targeted by this anti-Christian bias task force, right? Again, driving home the fact that this is not all Christians and it's not all white Christians, but within the Christian nationalist framework, right? Their power depends on presenting it as though this is Christianity and all good people are on this side. And the most inconvenient people to that messaging are fellow Christians who say, I am a devout Christian and I reject that, right? Those are honestly have to be destroyed. So I'm watching with trepidation what this task force comes out with. And it's obviously not just fellow Christians that will be targeted, but also fellow Christians. And, what does this mean for religious liberty? What does it mean for the separation of church and state? What does this mean for our absolutely foundational principles that were established to preserve the free practice of religion, to preserve freedom of conscience, that has really defined who our country is at our best and has led to really thriving faith traditions inside this country. I just think that what we're tinkering with here is chilling.
Yeah, well, I think that's right, and I think just this conflation of religious liberty equals anti-Christian bias, and anti-Christian bias equals anti-white evangelical Christian bias, right? So the sum total of religious liberty has been conscribed or circumscribed down to this little sphere of protection for white conservative evangelical Christians, and that's what's really going to matter. These offices are not going to stick up for the rights of Muslims. These offices are not going to stick up for the rights of Lutherans. We're already seeing Lutherans under attack, right? Lutheran social services, Lutheran immigrant and refugee resettlement efforts already under attack as well. So that's what's going to happen is religious liberty is suddenly just going to mean this one protected class, right, of people, and so the term gets hollowed out, and that's part of the propaganda thing, right, is to kind of take a term and redefine it in ways that just means radically the opposite of what the term actually means.
I really
Yeah,
want to hear what Jamar says about this.
it's a form of white Christian privilege. I mean, we can narrow it down to white Christian nationalist kind of privilege. And to everyone's point, when you hear that term Christian coming from this regime, it doesn't mean followers of Jesus. It's referring to a socio-political movement that has now taken over at the highest realms of power and is recreating religion in its image, recreating Christianity in its image, which I think somewhere in the Ten Commandments said not to do that. The other thing is like, so understanding that being a Christian, being in church, being, a person of faith isn't going to protect you, isn't going to loop you in to their circles because you're not the right kind of Christian, because you believe in justice and equality and empathy. That apparently is not part of the Christian call with these folks. The second thing is I keep, kind of shouting from the rooftops that there is a different witness in Christianity in the United States. So, yes, not all white Christians writ large are white Christian nationalists. That cuts across evangelical, mainline, and Catholic. But also, the historic Black Christian tradition arose specifically to oppose things like white Christian nationalism. Like, it's not some side initiative that comes around every once in a while. Why, after the Civil War, did Black Christians, one of the first things they did was form their own churches, networks, eventually coalescing into historically Black denominations? It wasn't because of these deep theological debates over the doctrine of the Trinity or homoousios or anything of that nature. It was because they didn't want to be treated as second-class citizens in the household of God, because even though they claimed and professed the same religion, they weren't treated that way. And honestly, now, a big difference is a lot of white Christians are feeling that more acutely. That, oh, we're not the same kind of Christian, and we're actually bearing some of the burdens and some of the injustices that come with that. But there are traditions, and not just the Black Christian tradition, many marginalized communities who have always been, in certain senses, on the margins of politics and economics in society. So, what does it really look like, I would say, for a coalition of the willing among white Christians to truly not just sit at the feet and learn from other traditions that have a different witness, but actually follow the lead of and support? So maybe the solution, one of the solutions here, as we think about this, isn't what do white churches do on their own, but how can they come alongside other Christians and other Christian traditions that are already and have been doing the work and support them? What the specific contours are going to vary by your location, but I think it begins with the sort of psychological, spiritual, heart disposition shifting to where um, our brothers and sisters in Christ must become greater. We must become less. We don't have to be the center of the show and find the solutions here. And so, that's my little soapbox. I keep saying it, and I love it when I see it happening. But along the lines of, we don't know, many of us are not cognizant of just how serious what we're seeing is. I think also there are a lot of people of faith who aren't quite cognizant of how urgent the need is to access the riches of our shared tradition, by the way. This is something that we can all learn from and claim as followers of the Lord. So that's what I'm eager to see.
Jamar, that is like stuck with me so much. Like what the image I have of you is we were sitting in Atlanta at St. Luke's Episcopal, and you were sitting on the table and you went, hello, hello, right? Like this,
Literally.
saying like, we got an African American Black church tradition here, right? And I think about that now every time I see on social media, and you've all seen it too, lots of posts about Bonhoeffer, right? And Bonhoeffer moment and like all that, and like that's all relevant and good and right. But I think what you said, Jamar, every time I see one of those, I think of you, and I think of you saying, why do we have to cross an ocean and go back to the 1930s to find an example of kind of Christians standing up for justice, right? We got that right here. It just happens to look like the African American church, which is, there's a weird set, you're right, there's a weird set of blinders on for many white Christians to not look right next door. Right, for not only like a historical example, but partners in the current moment. That I think we just got to really. So I'll encourage all of you when we see Bonhoeffer, it's like yes, of course, and I think that I am now fully on board that what we're all taught about being very careful about the Nazi analogy. That's all correct too, but it's not always inappropriate. And in this moment, I think it's not always inappropriate, but. When I think Bonhoeffer, I'm also now doing a quick click to Black Church in America.
Jamar, so I was preaching at a Presbyterian church in DC last week, the weekend before last. And the same thing actually happened, is that someone asked, is this the Bonhoeffer moment? And at that point, a woman who was a member of their own congregation stood up and she said, we really should be listening to the experience of people like me. And she was Asian American.
Mm.
And then she started talking about what that has been like for her, being a Christian, being Asian American, all of the prejudice and bigotry and that is brought along. And boy, she gave like this really stirring, amazing, and inspiring testimony. And after she finished, I said, "You sound like my friend Jemar Tisby."
Don't insult her like that.
And and that got us into this really interesting conversation about the narrow vision of white churches. And I've been sharing with a lot of people recently. There's a wonderful book by uh, Episcopal bishop. He's now retired from office, but he's still an Episcopal bishop. He doesn't serve a particular diocese anymore, but he still holds the office. Um, his name is Stephen Charleston, and he was, I believe, the first Native American bishop in the Episcopal Church, or close to it, if he wasn't the first. But he's a wonderful person, incredibly spiritually insightful, very theologically savvy. And he wrote a book called We Survived the End of the World.
Hmm.
We Survived the End of the World. And it's a book about how Native people actually did survive a genocide and what that did to them. Oh, there it is.
There it is on my
There it
desk.
is. That is
Yeah.
a great book. I highly recommend it, but that's the kind of thing you're talking about. And so
Yeah.
I've just been throwing out resources to people, just saying you're part of the reason you're so incredibly like, I don't know what to do. I'm so upset, is because a lot of white people, me included, have never had to face quite this before. And all around us, there are people who have faced things similar to this moment before at other times in history. And now we all get to be around the same table
Hmm.
and move into the future truly together.
So there are a lot of questions coming in the Q&A right now, and I thought I'd just take a couple of them and throw them out to all of us. One, are there any indications that some in the Christian right are starting to realize what they have wrought? And I presume meaning in a negative way, any remorse, any regret? I see Diana already shaking her head no, I have not seen any. But another one too is a question that has plagued me. And so I'll throw that out to everybody, because I was the one who said, I'm waiting for this catalyzing moment. The question is, what if we wait too long? How do we know if we wait too long? There was another question too, right, about, do we have 6 months here? What are we looking at here? And I don't know. None of us know. This is historically unprecedented, where we find ourselves. But man, does this keep me up at night, right? When part of me worries, like, if we try to force something too soon, like if it's not the right moment, maybe we only have one shot, but we wait too long, we don't have any shot at all. But I do think that as we're talking here, churches, really, churches across denominations, across the color line, they have what it takes. They have what it takes to start a mass movement. But what do you all think to either of those? Are you seeing any cracks in the foundation yet on, the other side? And how do we know? How do we know when the right moment is?
I'm glad you brought that first question up around, cracks in the foundation. Are people seeing the light? And I hear this a lot, and it's almost a desperate plea that people have. Like, I hope, like, really, really hope that some folks who once supported this man and his regime will now realize how bad it is, and they'll become, in some way, shape, or form, allies. I don't hold out that hope. And my proof of concept is COVID, where people literally let a virus kill them or their loved ones for political ideological reasons. Like, and it's not like it was a particular person. This was a virus that they let take it to. And mind you, we have such poor memories. The president himself nearly died from COVID early on. And if not for um, over the top intervention, he may have succumbed to the virus himself. And still, this became a dividing line in churches and everything like that. So I don't know. I mean, just looking at the evidence that we have, I don't know that many people, or certainly not enough people, would get to the point of seeing the light no matter how bad it gets. And maybe when they finally do, it'll still be too late in terms of intervening in a sort of electoral democratic way. Um, so I say that to say we maybe need to find other routes and routes and other means. And then to the second part, I'll let others address that.
Well,
I think I have
okay.
seen the possibility of one crack, and that's related around that religious freedom question that we were talking about, that Kristen brought up a few minutes ago. I'm the resource queen, I guess, tonight. The other thing that I want you to all know about is that the Interfaith Alliance has put up a briefing memo on their website. Um, and this is all, these 2 pages here, these are all the violations. Oh, look at that. That's a kind of a nice shot of Diana. These are all the violations of the Trump administration of religious freedom in the last week alone.
Hmm.
And one of them I've seen a lot of people talk about in the chat. There are a lot of Lutherans here, apparently, is against the Lutheran social services. And so some people came when that came out, I posted that almost immediately. I think I might have alerted you guys to the moment that I saw that for the first time. And when I put it up, people said, "Oh, well, that's to be expected. You know, they attack the Episcopal Church is so liberal, and why aren't they're attacking the ELCA?" Well, the thing is that Lutheran Social Services is, I think, the only place that is shared denominationally between the more liberal ELCA, the big mainline Lutheran denomination, and the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, which is the teeny tiny, very conservative, hyper MAGA, hyper Christian nationalist Lutheran Church. And one of the indicted conspirators in the Georgia case was actually a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor who led part of the attack, allegedly led part of the attack on those 2 women in the Georgia case about election ballot counting. And so anyway, so some people are saying this, oh, well, he's just going after the liberal Lutherans. Well, no, he's not. He's going after Lutheran social services. And Lutheran social services includes the Missouri Synod. And so what that means, and apparently someone told me earlier today, I have not tracked this down, but he went after Christianity Today earlier today, the evangelical magazine. So if they are making mistakes like that, by going after the people who voted for them, that could create a crack. And even though they're saying, you're our kind of Christian or you're not a Christian, they're even beginning to attack their kind of Christian. When people realize that in the Missouri Synod, and people who are subscribers to Christianity Today start realizing that, when the Wheaton College uh, and, sort of alumni and board and faculty realize that Russ Vought is going to dismantle democracy and religious freedom to the point of destroying their own school. He is their proud alumni. Maybe they're going to have a second thought.
I mean, there's clear. The thing I'm thinking about is like overreach, right? But I think we're too early. I think that's the challenge. It's so easy to break stuff, right? And you could do it very fast. What's harder is the pushback. And so I've been reading articles and things give me hope this week. Like, so there have been already some victories. They kind of, like the birthright citizenship got struck down, right, by an early court, kind of putting a halt to that. There are other places where they've had to back away. The strategy clearly seems to be we're going to kind of flail around and break laws in every direction we can to increase executive power and crush the independence of other branches of government and other independent agencies. That's why the inspectors general get dismissed. They're the internal watchdogs for all these agencies. But so that's the game plan, and it takes a while, right, to kind of push back with litigation. But public citizens, one group I would hold up that's been kind of taking the lead on many of these lawsuits, kind of holding the administration accountable, getting these preliminary injunctions, temporary restraining orders to kind of put the brakes on things while they're litigated. That is happening, and it's just a little slower, and it's harder to kind of see it, I think, with the speed with which the braking can go on. But there are those things that are happening. I'm kind of watching. The other thing to watch for is there is, I think, an announcement going to be going out. I'm not sure if it's gone out yet. I saw some early notice about it, about calls for town hall meetings with local representatives at the local level all over the country. So stay tuned for that, and let's show up when those happen. That'll be one clear place to show up at the local level. I saw another thing about phone lines being tied up. Keep calling. Email is another quick way. They do tally emails. If you do that, be sure and put in the subject header a clear indication of which side of the issue you're on. What they typically do is they tally emails pro, negative, neutral. And so just be really clear in the subject matter, like you're opposing, what's going on, so they can quickly get it in the right bin. And that is one small way of kind of putting pressure. But I did see that they typically get something like 40 calls an hour, and they're getting more than 2,000 calls an hour, right? So at the switchboard. So it is happening, and we need to kind of keep the pressure on, particularly just about the rampant law breaking, going on. But none of us should be holding our breath for any sort of white evangelical leaders to kind of they've all already kind of gone around the bend, and I don't hold any prospects of any of them walking it back at all. I mean, nor rank and file. White evangelicals voted 80%, more than 80% for Trump. His approval rating has never been below 58% among white evangelicals. Never, since 2016. And it's sky high right before the election. So I wouldn't hold my breath there. But again, I do think the other thing to remember, one last point on the overreach, is they're still equating, for example, opposition to abortion with people of faith. And that's a mistake. It's inaccurate. It's not true. There is, in fact, only one major religious kind of denominational family among whom a majority oppose the legality of abortion. That's white evangelical Protestants. That's it, right? About 6 in 10 Catholics, both white and Latino, support abortion rights in the country. That's different from where the church hierarchy is, to be sure. But if you look at the rank and file, that's where it is. 6 in 10 or more mainline Protestants support general abortion rights. African American Protestants support abortion rights. So it is not a people of faith thing. It is a white evangelical thing. And again, white evangelicals, they are 13% of the population. That is it, right? So again, kind of way out of the mainstream on some of these issues.
Yeah, I want to say real quick to my comment. I was watching some of the chat. I don't think, by pointing out that Lutheran example about the Missouri Synod Lutherans, I don't think that means that all of a sudden the Missouri Synod is going to wake up and say, oh, we shouldn't have voted for this guy. But what I do think is there are going to be some leaders in Missouri Synod who are going to see all of a sudden the funding for really important programs and missionary programs that they have that's going to dry up. And those Missouri Synod Lutherans are in a better place than the ELCA leaders to be able to reach out to some of the people in Trump world and say, hey, you guys made a mistake attacking all Lutherans. And if those people are savvy enough, they might be able to get some of that funding restored to some programs that could still benefit people who need it very, very badly. I'm not overly optimistic by that, but part of what I'm trying to urge people to do is to look for the people in the middle who still have heart and who aren't completely on board with the worst of all of this, and understand that harm can be mitigated by even someone who voted differently than you. And I want to see more of that coming up while we're also seeing outright resistance. There's going to be an inside and an outside strategy to correcting all of this, to making it better. And we're outsiders on this call, all four of us. But there are people who are closer to the center who probably actually agree with many of the things we're saying and who might actually have a potential of making just enough change to mitigate some suffering for some people.
Hey, Diana, could I throw out another question here for us to grapple with? That's related to what you were just talking about. So there are some people who might be in a position to mitigate some of the harm. What are we really going for here? What is the end game? So we have a question in the Q&A. What exactly is the desired outcome of the movement whose moment you are waiting for? I would love to hear
Great question.
each of us, any of us, what is feasible now? Like we had an end game pre-November. That didn't work out. What is our best case scenario right now? What are we working for? Or are we just trying to mitigate harm here and there and what? Try to hang on? How long?
Well, I'll go two quick things that are coming to mind. So Diana mentioned Interfaith Alliance. The other group that comes to mind that's also filing lawsuits are Americans Uniting for the Separation of Church and State. So I think supporting, for this crowd we're talking about that cares about faith and politics, the groups that are really looking out for separation of church and state, religious liberty, like those. And right now, I think part of the weight is that the most important work is actually being done in the courts right now. So supporting that work because that is the place where the brakes can get pumped in the short run. And then I think the sort of public opinion wave has to come after that, right? But the most emergency thing is that the courts have got to intervene and try to pump the brakes on some of the worst of this going on. So kind of paying attention, Public Citizen, AU, ACLU, like those kind of organizations that are doing that work are vitally important. The other thing I would say, somebody mentioned in here about what can there be a faith leaders march? I would love to see, and maybe we'll just kind of call for you all who are here to help make it happen. When these town halls get organized, they're going to be organized by elected officials. But it would be great to see right alongside of it, faith leaders holding a parallel gathering, right, in local communities to kind of both in conjunction with that and maybe even alongside of it or the next day or something like that, where you could kind of keep the conversation moving and even include kind of a faith perspective on what's happening, but use the momentum generated by this kind of national town hall movement to kind of help faith groups organize on the ground as well.
I don't think any of us will have the one blanket solution. One of the things I'm looking at is a massive changing of the guard in the Democratic Party, particularly at the national level. We absolutely need fresh people and fresh ideas in there, and it is incredibly frustrating to see the only other party in an effectively two-party political system be completely on its heels against this regime. And the way our politics is set up, we don't have a lot of other recourses in sort of traditional electoral means. We have to a certain extent, rely on the other party, on the Democratic Party. And so, what is happening there that shakes up business as usual? Yes, there's activity, there's conversation. But again, is it radical enough? Does it get down to the roots enough that we have no longer mainly operate on seniority? And just because somebody's been there a long time, that means they're qualified to lead in particular ways. Do we have, expert communicators who are going up front? Do we lean into the progressive elements, and particularly around labor, that historically have been the hallmark of the Democratic Party for the past several decades? And, I'm thinking particularly of my undergrad students and how disillusioned they are with the entire political process, both sides of the aisle. And there is a compelling case to make, but we do need new messengers, or at least different ways of conveying the message. So I think that's one thing. I think another is direct action, nonviolent protest. So we mentioned the National Prayer Breakfast was happening. I wasn't cognizant of the timing, but it would also be very powerful to have Christians show up to something like that and be like, no, this is not our Christianity. And this is not what we stand for. And what you're talking, we could have predicted what they were talking about, right? And so, what are the other sort of strategic moments that will be celebrated by this regime where we can show up and say, not on our watch? That gets a little bit to what Kristen was saying, waiting for the moment, right? I don't know what that particular moment is. I do love the idea of town halls with your elected officials because I think that's where we can effectively put pressure. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that, but certainly open to other ideas we're all just trying to figure out right now.
I, I always think I've been thinking a lot that there's two things that have to be accomplished right now. I don't know what the long-term vision is. I don't know what's going to be 5 or 10 or 25 years from now. But right now, there's both the mitigation of harm necessity, because that is just a necessity for human beings, is to mitigate the harm being done to other humans, regardless of who they voted for. I mean, that is what it means to be a human being, a decent one at least. And so there's the mitigation of harm need. And then there is the need for the prophetic transformation. And so Jamar was just talking about we have to change the Democratic Party. We have to get a new vision, new leadership. There has to be so both of those are in play. And I think it's really important for people here on this call to know when you're doing which thing. And you can walk and chew gum at the exact same time. And so part of the mitigation of harm strategy, I think, was modeled by what happened with Joni Ernst. Remember when Pete Hegseth came out and Joni Ernst was like going, there's no way I'm voting for this guy. She said that every possible way she could without actually saying it to CNN and everybody else. Everybody knew that Joni Ernst was like probably not going to vote for him, and she might even vote him down in the actual committee. Well, when she was waffling on that, I think what happened is a lot of people who are like folks like us heard that and went, oh, good. She's going to take care of it. And what you didn't realize is that as soon as MAGA World heard that, they mounted a phone campaign and a threat campaign on her that was second to none. And they were calling her and sending people outside of her house and her offices and all this sort of stuff. And what happened is she backed down. See, we assumed the goodness of people, which of course Kristen would never do because she's a Calvinist, but I'm a Methodist and I always assume the goodness of people. So I just thought she's going to do the right thing. Thank goodness for that. Well, there were plenty of people around her who just went full throttle, bring her back to the fold. And then she all of a sudden reversed course. And what needed to happen there is that every single Democrat in Iowa needed to be as absolutely relentless as all of those MAGAs. And they needed to call her up and say, we don't like you. We didn't vote for you, but we're going to have your back. We're going to protect you, sister. We're going to make sure those oops, or I just said a bad word. I swore I wasn't going to do that tonight.
It's not me, it's you.
Oh, darn it. We're going to make sure that those people don't hurt you. And we want to see you stand up for democracy. And if you do that, we're going to give you a second look as a leader of this state. And I'm going to be grateful to you. And so, see, that's the thing, is that if you agree with things that we're saying and you live in a state where there are Republican senators and you think they're not listening to you, you're wrong. They might have their phones off the hook temporarily. They might not ever answer your emails, whatever, but you have to go to their offices. And the people who need to be put pressure on is these people who are just like, what's his name? Todd Young in Indiana, um, Joni Ernst in Iowa, Tom Tillis in North Carolina. We want to tar everybody with the same brush. But those are your mitigation of harm people. Those are the people who think if you have their back, even if MAGA is attacking them, if they think that somebody else is in their corner, they might just be brave enough to do one right thing. And that's all you need them to do right now. One right thing. You do not need them to register for your political party. You do not need to change their mind about XYZ issue that's your pet project. You need them to do one right thing. And you need to keep the pressure on for one right thing. So that's the mitigation of harm strategy. And then I think Jamar was so eloquent about some of that bigger strategy toward prophetic action.
Yeah, I think we need to show up all the places, all the time, like physically show up too. Just make yourself known, right? We started this conversation talking about those numbers that Robby has, right? 70% not on board with Christian nationalism. And we know that MAGA has the networks, they have the phone banks, they can mobilize, and they use the threats, right? The intimidation, the smear campaigns, and threats of violence. We all know that. So we need to show up doubly so in person, put our bodies into this movement. And we have to remember that courage is contagious. But so is cowardice.
Yes.
Right? If you don't see anybody else standing up, like it makes it feel like, oh, well, this isn't what we're doing, is it? And also, if I do stick my neck out, maybe I'm gonna get it chopped off here. Courage is contagious. If tens of thousands of us are just, we show up at a prayer service, we show up at our representative's office, we show up at a town hall. If we just show up constantly, that will change the narrative. And not just change the narrative, right? It's going to change reality, because right now they're seeing what sticks. They're trying everything and they're seeing what sticks. And we've got things going through the courts, and we'll see, prayers for how that turns out, if it works all the way up to the top, but we're working on that. But we can show up. We can just show up in person, and our presence simply says, no, not having this, not on our watch.
Y'all have done a phenomenal job in the Q&A. We have dozens of questions. Obviously, we can't get to them all. And there were tons of topics that we couldn't get to. Obviously, we know this is part of the strategy to have this deluge of news and information. And so don't think that if we didn't mention something, it's not important or it's not on our radars. Certainly check out each of our individual Substacks where we do highlight some of these specific topics in more detail, as well as what we're studying and learning. And there is a concrete ask here. This has been, I think, our biggest live turnout so far. We want to keep growing. And so the best way to do that is to subscribe at convocation.substack.com. And if you're already subscribed, then send it to someone else. We will have this episode up within about 24 hours or so. Take that, put it on social media, text the link to people in a direct share, put it on your own publications, however you can spread the word about this. If these conversations are helping you, then help spread the word. And of course, we all have our own individual Substacks. And I'm going to highlight and underline that because our institutional platforms are being targeted in some way, shape, or form. And so it gets harder to speak forthrightly about this authoritarian oligarchical takeover when the institutions themselves are having funding cut, DEI job cut, certain positions muzzled, all those things. So our individual Substack platforms, and we won't even get to what's happening on social media. Our individual Substack platforms are a really good way to ensure that we can keep doing the work that we are doing right now. So Robby had a good idea to close us out here, and I'll send it to you to kick us off.
Well, we thought we'd end with a little bit of hope. I know we're a little over the hour mark, and thanks for those of you who are sticking with us. So I asked everybody to kind of delve in and like bring us a word of hope here at the end. And I think some of us, maybe not all of us, are going to read something, but I'm going to read a little bit. I wrote a chapter in The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future called The Search for Hope in History. I'm here among the historians. I know you'll all appreciate that. And it was probably the hardest chapters. In fact, the last chapter I wrote in the book, and it was the hardest one to write because there'd been so much challenging history in the book. But I ended up kind of writing a little piece here. I'm just going to give you the based on the field work that I had done in local communities. And I think that's often where I end up finding hope. And so I just tried to describe what I was seeing and what images were in my head when I think about hope. So this is what I said. Um, uh, so at this point in the American story, a tidal wave of equity and justice, if that is what it might become, still seems to be building a swell far offshore. But buoyed on these waters are lights that are helping us find our way. A racially diverse group of kids fanning out in Sumner, Mississippi, filming documentary projects that tell their stories alongside Emmett Till's. Daughters of plantation owners standing beside sons of sharecroppers to tell the truth in the Mississippi Delta. A white, black, and Latino trio determined to commemorate the lynchings in Duluth and the 3,000 Duluthians who showed up for the unveiling of the city's memorial and pledged their commitment to create a new history. A white church in Tulsa, confessing its role in covering up acts of mass white racial terrorism. The leader of the worldwide Roman Catholic Church kneeling to kiss an indigenous woman's hand. A black international tennis star is the last man standing on Monument Avenue in the former capital of the Confederacy. A president issuing a proclamation honoring Indigenous Peoples Day. A Native American Christian minister working on behalf of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation and with the Minnesota Council of Churches to help white Christians be not just smarter, but better people. And the determination against all odds of Native American leaders across generations to hold the U.S. to its word and treaty obligations and to maintain their dignity amid endless broken promises and dismissal by our governmental leaders. And then I say, while the destination seems scarcely discernible on the horizon, these beacons are sufficient if we persist to help us chart a different course.
So good. Anyone else have something to share? I know that we can just sit with that here, but go ahead.
Yeah, Robby asked us to share something that we'd written. And so I went right to my book, Grateful, which was written during the first months of Trump's last term. This is at the end about gratitude. Gratitude is a defiance of sorts, the defiance of kindness in the face of anger, of connection in the face of division, and of hope in the face of fear. Gratefulness does not acquiesce to evil. It resists evil. That resistance is not that of force or direct confrontation. Rather, gratitude undoes evil by tunneling under its foundations of anger, resentment, and greed. Thus, gratitude strengthens our character and our moral resolve, giving each of us the possibility of living peaceably and justly. It untwists knotted hearts, waking us to a new sense of who we are as individuals and in community. Being thankful is the very essence of what it means to be alive and to know life abundantly. Gratefulness empowers us. It makes joy and love possible. It rearranges the way we see and experience what is all around us. Gratitude makes all things new. It transforms what is broken and gives us the ability to act more joyfully. That is why gratitude is central to all of the world's religions. As a practice, it embodies the wisdom of humanity's greatest spiritual teachers, love of neighbor. Gratitude takes us from abstract belief to living compassion. Gratitude is strongest, clearest, most robust, and radical when things are really hard. Really hard. All is lost hard. Be grateful.
So poetic. Kristin, do you have anything you want to share?
Nothing like that. So this is funny because when Robby floated this idea just before we came on tonight, by the way, I thought, oh, great. So here's a little backstory. When I was finishing Jesus and John Wayne, like almost done, like almost ready to go into production, final tweaks, I get an email from my editor, like out of the blue. Kristin, this book is really depressing. And I just wrote back, I was like, yeah, I know. And he's like, no, like, actually, that's a problem. Like, you can't do this to your readers. Like, it's just too much. And so I said, okay, let me think here. And again, time was of the essence. Like, we're down to the last like couple days. And I took some time, looked over the manuscript, and I wrote it back, and I was like, this is all I've got. I mean, it's not a good story. It is, this is so deeply embedded. I don't think this is going to change. And this is what it is. And so he wrote back and said, okay, I respect that. And then the next day he wrote again and said, Kristin, just give us anything. So I reconfigured the very end of the book and I gave him one sentence. What was once done might also be undone. And I felt so sheepish sending that back. And he's like, fine, we'll take it. And it went into production, right? But it's true. It is true, right? It felt so insufficient. But it is also true. What history does is it shows us how we got to where we are. And nothing was inevitable. And history is full of surprises, contingencies, and it's full of agents, of people, sometimes very surprising people you would never expect, standing up and saying, no, not this time, not on my watch. And you never know who those people are going to be, where they're going to come from, and what kind of movement they're going to spark. And so I will leave us with that what has brought us here has been so many people making choices, many for reasons that are not laudable, others with good intentions, but here we are. And what are we going to do next?
You did it. That's hopeful. That's inspirational.
Thank you.
And very true.
Jamar, you
hard.
get the
Downright
last
sunny
word
for a
here.
Calvinist. Look at that.
I'm going to end on a story I've told many times and will continue to tell from the Spirit of Justice. And I open and close the book with Myrlie Evers Williams, whose husband was killed in front of their home in June 1963 because he worked for voting rights, what's being attacked even today. And it was at the grand opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in 2017. And it was after the public events during a time for reporters and journalists just to ask her questions, a sort of press conference. And a journalist asked her, well, how does now compare to the 1960s and the civil rights movement? And she basically said, I'm seeing a lot now of what I saw then. And she said she was weary. But then she ended with these words, which have come back to me again and again in this struggle that we're all in for democracy and justice. She said, but it's something about the spirit of justice that raises up like a war horse, that horse that stands with its back sunk in and hears that bell. I like to say the bell of freedom. And all of a sudden, it becomes straight and the back becomes stiff and you become determined all over again. So I hope that the spirit of justice will animate our activism and that even and especially in the times when we feel weary, we would become determined all over again. On behalf of me and my co-host, thank you for joining this episode of the Convocation Unscripted. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter at convocation.substack.com and our individual Substacks. We'll see you soon at the next Convocation.